Today on Truths That Transform.
If there are no absolutes, there is no God, because God is the ultimate absolute.
Children are being taken away from their parents for not being affirmed as the opposite sex. This is absolute cult madness.
It's the Church of Jesus Christ
Welcome to Truths That Transform, a production of Coral Ridge Ministries. I'm Pastor Rob Pacienza. Most of us have never lived through a time more confusing than the last handful of years. The human tendency is to rebel against God, but today we're seeing rebellion on steroids. Our culture now believes on a large scale that we each define our own reality. That's a recipe for conflict, confusion, and despair, which is exactly what we're seeing all around us. On today's program, we'll debunk some of these cultural lies that have taken over. Perhaps the most fashionable one at the moment is the lie that gay and trans are real identities that should be affirmed. From our new documentary, Lies of a Culture in Chaos, here's our own Christina Videl with a closer look.
Since the beginning of history, humanity has recognized the distinction between the sexes and valued their unique characteristics. But in today's hypersexualized culture, dark forces attempt to not only subvert biological reality, but blur the lines between male and female.
God's created order is so important, and we find it in Genesis 1:27 and 28. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it."
Former lesbian feminist activist Rosaria Butterfield remembers her time as one of the nation's first professors of queer theory at Syracuse University in New York. Rosaria came out of the movement when she was radically transformed by Jesus Christ. She has witnessed the evolution of the lesbian, gay, bisexual lobby to today's LGBTQIA+ monolith, which she describes as the idol of our day.
And the reason I say it's an idol is you are demanded to bend the knee to it. You will lose your job. You don't use false pronouns.
I use he, him pronouns.
I guess you could call me gay. I'm homoflexible, really.
Fluid. Fluid.
Can you explain what that means to me a little bit more?
Whatever turns you on.
Gay. Yes.
The culture has determined that homosexuality is right and normal. It now has turned to the church and said, since we have shifted in our position, you must shift as well, and we will not tolerate any dissent. So for that reason, the culture now is beginning to tell the church that we may not call homosexuality a sin, that if we do, that is damaging, and that we may not tell homosexual people that if they come to Christ and repent, they will find any kind of freedom.
Our faithful churches have people who are torn in so many directions from the way that the LGBTQ+ idol has frightened them, either by threatening them that they would lose their job if they don't use pronouns, or literally stealing their children.
Brad Dacus, president of the Pacific Justice Institute, warns that families across the nation are facing persecution for their belief in God's design for man and woman.
The next tsunami that we see coming down is dealing with children in public schools and the pronoun movement. Now, the pronoun movement is in private companies as well. So we're dealing with regular people working for companies and the government. But it's particularly sharp and painful when we see it manifest in our public schools.
I think we need to be very clear that Christians were called to bless this world. We are not just called to be Sunday morning Christians. We are not just called to be thriving with the shades drawn. When Christians are Christian statesmen in the world, and when we are the doctors and the lawyers and the professors and the politicians, it goes well for everyone. But a world that is growing in its homosexuality, transgenderism, and singleness is a world that is not blessed, but is judged. We are under judgment. And so it's time that we find our voice.
Artist, investigative journalist, and former radical feminist activist Jennifer Billick has appeared on numerous conservative platforms because the left, to which she once belonged, accuses her of being transphobic for warning families against what she calls synthetic sex identities.
If they go to the school and say, this is happening to my child, the school says, yes, this is a good thing. This is a positive thing. They identify as a boy, and they are a boy. And you have to support that. This is your problem. It's not theirs. And they go to tell their friends and say, oh, you know, this happened, this is happening. And their friends say, well, you're a bigot if you don't go along with this, you know. And then they go to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist says, right, this is your problem. It's not their problem. They actually are the opposite sex. Right? So exactly where do you turn? In California, you know, children are being taken away from their parents for not being affirmed as the opposite sex. This is absolute cult madness.
After justification, you are called to the work of sanctification.
Rosaria has been married for over 20 years. She is a homeschooling mom, a grandmother, and an author. In her most recent book, 5 Lies of Our Anti-Christian Age, she underscores the fact that parents are being coerced into affirming their children's LGBTQ+ identities through school policies, newly adopted corporate guidelines, and forced through state legislation. Rosaria points out that even some churches and parachurch ministries are buying into those same lies.
Homosexuality is normal. Feminism is good for the church and the world. Transgenderism is normal. The world believes all those lies. I used to believe all those lies. So I wrote the book because I wanted people to know why it is that the gospel cannot be wrenched from the Old Testament, that the seeds of the gospel are in the garden. I wanted you to know what time it is, as somebody who's been in this game for a while. I wanted you to know where the gay rights movement has gone, where it's come, and why in the world it's in your church. And I want you to know that you have the right to drive out those wolves.
The evangelical left's approach is to revise. It's a revisionist movement. It not only seeks to revise our understanding of homosexuality, it also wants to revise our understanding of salvation itself. Progressive Christianity teaches that there are many ways to God, that there are many sources of truth, and that the traditional view of sexuality and family should be revised to include homosexuality, transgenderism, and bisexuality.
A Gallup poll from March 2024 shows that 7.6% of U.S. adults identify as LGBT, a number which has more than doubled in the last 12 years. And suddenly, a large proportion of our children is questioning their sexuality as well.
If you look at the latest stats from Gallup poll and this latest survey, it says 19.7% of Gen Z identify as LGBTQIA++. You know, compare that to Gen X, for instance, which is 3.3%. It's devastating, and this indoctrination is happening in our public schools, in our media, even among the professional sports teams, and it's devastating to children.
It's important to God that children have a female mother and a male father, right? But our culture has blurred these categories and has tried to make us think that sex is really just about, it's just an activity that can be completely separate from who you are or from, you know, from what you are as a human being, but it can't be separated because the design for sex that God gave us is one man, one woman in marriage for a lifetime, in that covenant and safety of marriage. But when we get all these things confused, it's no surprise that we're going to be confused about about gender as well, like what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man.
The worst part is that the major thrust of the new gender orthodoxy is specifically targeted at capturing the youngest hearts and minds with the glitter and rainbows it promises.
You really have to look no further than watching parents bring their children to what is being called Pride Parade, where men are gesticulating with nothing on or a G-string on, with fake breasts, very sexualized manner. Men are tying each other up, stuffing bald gags in their mouths on the street in the public square. And men are dressing up like caricatures of women in their schools, in their libraries.
One of the things the Biden administration's anti-bullying legislation required and mandated for all of your public school children, one of the things it requires you to be is an ally. And there, right there, in that plus sign is ally. And an ally is someone who affirms the identity and the practice and also the ontology, the idea that this is actually not just how a person is, but who a person is, of LGBTQ+. And what's very important as a Christian, we need to remember that the Lord Jesus Christ does not make an ally to any sin that he has shed blood for on the cross.
States like California mandate the positive indoctrination of children all the way down to the kindergarten level in every public school to second guess inherently what their gender is, what their true gender identity is. These are 5-year-olds being impacted. They are bringing out and facilitating confusion in an orchestrated, legislatively mandated way in the state of California. It's not just California. New York has this. Oregon has it. Washington State. Other blue states, oppressive states, have this as a matter of law to mandate little children all the way through high school. So it's already exploded. It's going to explode even more on a wider and wider scale.
So what do we do? And this is where we need to remember very clearly the promise of the gospel. And it's a hard promise. It is not an easy promise. This is the promise that says that sometimes when Christians lose, the gospel wins. So we are to pray, and what are we called to do? We are called to grow in sanctification, and we are called to pray that our faith faileth not.
Though the new world of acronyms, made-up pronouns, and the redefinition of marriage and family seems to have sprung up out of nowhere, the seeds for it were planted decades ago when God was pushed to the sidelines and people began to reject the reality of absolute truth. The statement, "there are no absolutes," is both self-contradictory and a persistent modern myth. Here's my mentor and predecessor, Dr. D. James Kennedy, refuting this dangerous falsehood with biblical truth.
Modern myths that indeed are destroying our society. The first one, and the most foundational of them, and perhaps the most prevalent almost of them, is this. I'm sure you've heard it 1,000 times. There are no absolutes. All truth is relative. One student who may not have quite gotten the message in high school raised his hand when the professor said that we can know nothing for certain. And he said, "Professor, are you sure of that?" He said, "I'm certain." Which humorously points out the total inconsistency and contradictoriness of this very idea. To say there are no absolutes is a contradiction in terms, because that statement is given as an absolute. There absolutely are no absolutes. That is self-contradictory. Let's consider just what it means when they say there are no absolutes. Why do they hold that? If you were to talk to an average person and say something was true, absolutely true, they would look at you with amazement. They would probably say, "Don't you know that we live in a relativistic universe? Where have you been for the last 50 years? Did you never hear of Einstein? Don't you know about the theory of relativity? Don't you know that everything is relative?" Relativity applies only to scientific knowledge. Ethics, morals, religion deal with revelation. And we have been given the revelation from Christ. He says, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Well, exactly what are absolutes anyway? Well, if you were to check the word in Webster's dictionary, you would discover that absolute comes from the two Latin words ab, from, and salvere, to free from, to set free, from which we get the word dissolve. So it means to be free, to be set free is what an absolute is. It's set free from what? One, free from any imperfection. It is pure. Two, it is free from any admixture. It is perfect. Three, it is free from any limit or restriction or qualification as an absolute monarch. And four, it is positive, certain, and authoritative. That's what absolutes are, whether we're talking about persons or about truth. It is free from any kind of error, admixture, imperfection, or limit. Now, when they say there are no absolutes, I would have you to understand that they are saying there is no God. So that by saying there are no absolutes and covering that over with some sort of an Einsteinian theory of relativity, what they're really doing is masking the fact that they're teaching you atheism or teaching it to your children. If there are no absolutes, there is no God, because God is the ultimate absolute. His omnipotence is without limit or restraint or qualification. His omniscience is unlimited. His omnipresence is without restraint or restriction. God is the altogether absolute one. He is the absolute monarch, the absolute God. And we need to keep in mind what kind of sleight of hand they're trying to pull upon us. Now, this comes to us in lots of different kinds of phrases. People say, "Oh, well, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me." You've probably heard that. Or maybe you've heard it put this way: "Well, that's your truth. That's not my truth." What's true for one culture is not true for another. They call that cultural relativism. Not only is it true for individuals, but true for cultures as well. Now, they have found that there are times when they really run into difficulty with this. In fact, they don't realize it, but it's destroying the very basis of society and civilization. It will indeed dissolve the bands of society and civilization ultimately if it continues to spread into the minds of all people. And so it's true that every living creature has been given God-ordained limits. God has given us an ordained element in which we are to live, both physically and morally as well. The fish who decides that he doesn't like the restrictions of the water and wants to expand his horizons and visit new places and do new things may take a great, bold, adventuresome leap onto the shore. But his expected liberty will soon turn into gasping death as he flops his life away there in the deadly air that he thought was going to be his pleasure and his joy. God has established bonds for us, but Satan is always the one who is saying, "Do not observe these bonds. Yea, hath God said, ye shall not eat of all of the trees of the garden." Expand your limits. Break down the walls. Let there be no restraints. You must be free to do anything at all. Only Christ can give you real freedom. He can absolutely set us free and break the chains that bind. They are dissolved by the blood of Christ. Shackles are broken at Calvary. Have you been set free? Would you be set free? One of the great tragedies of the slavery of sin is that so often those who are most in bondage are most blind to their sin. And it's not until it's utterly destroying their life completely that their eyes are even open to seeing what they have done and hearing their cries and laments when they realize that their lives have been destroyed by the power of sin. Oh, if we really knew it for what it was, we would hate it as we ought to and flee from it to Christ. Would you be set free from sin? Then fly to the cross. Flee to the crucified one. Come unto him who has said that the Son of Man can set you free. Free from all of those things that do nothing but make your life miserable. And you can enjoy the glorious liberty of the sons of God. Won't you come to that cross today?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Kennedy Cassidy. As my father just shared, so many people have been enslaved by the lie that there are no absolutes. But these cultural lies have the power to destroy, and often they sneak into our thinking or the thinking of our kids without us even realizing it. That's why our brand new book is so important, and we want to send it to you as thanks for your generous donation to the work of this ministry. It's entitled 10 Lies of a Culture in Chaos, What You Believe Matters. And it deals with destructive falsehoods like, there is no God, all roads lead to God, and love is love. We've pulled together a group of outstanding experts to deal with these cultural lies, like Sean McDowell, Rosaria Butterfield, Elisa Childers, Rob Pacienza, and my dad, D. James Kennedy, among others. So many of these lies are repeated so often that we don't even realize that we're swallowing them. But this book will help you, as well as your children and grandchildren, sort through the falsehoods that are tearing our culture apart and destroying lives. And if you're able to give a donation of $100 or more, we'll send you the book plus our brand new documentary special, Cultural Chaos: The Lies Behind America's Breakdown. This special program is a companion to the book, and it presents compelling truth that counters several influential lies like gay and trans are real identities to be affirmed, and God doesn't belong in government. Find out the truth and be equipped to stand against Satan's deceptions in our day. And I want to ask you to especially consider a gift right now, because it's a crucial time for our ministry and for our nation. Coral Ridge Ministries exists to stand against the void of truth in our culture and advance the kingdom of God. And our fiscal year closes at the end of this month. We cannot waste a single minute of the time we've been given to stand for truth and defend freedom. And we cannot do it without your partnership. With so much at stake and with strategically important opportunities before us, your generosity is very needed and deeply valued. If you give right now, your impact will essentially be doubled, so it's a great time to give. Several generous donors to this ministry have established the $250,000 Bold Truth Challenge. Every dollar you give up to that amount will be matched, allowing you to have an outsized impact for biblical truth. So please, contact us right away before our fiscal year ends. We'll send you the book, 10 Lies of a Culture in Chaos, as thanks for your generous donation. And the book plus the new DVD documentary, Cultural Chaos: The Lies Behind America's Breakdown, as thanks for your gift of $100 or more. Simply write to us at Coral Ridge Ministries, Box 11154, Fort Lauderdale, Florida 33339, or call toll-free 877-962-7677, or go online to crm.tv.
We all saw the protests that broke out on American college campuses this spring, with students en masse supporting the terrorist organization Hamas. A recent video from St. Louis showed teachers leading grade schoolers in a protest, holding a sign that said Free Palestine and chanting, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Zionism's got to go." It probably goes without saying that second graders don't have informed opinions on Israel and Palestine. These are the opinions of their teachers, who are using the kids as props. And it's actually consistent with the left's approach for over a century now. The leaders of cultural Marxism in America called for the slow march through the institutions. The idea was to take over the university faculties bit by bit and begin setting policy for those institutions. At the same time, it put them in position to brainwash the students under their charge, and then finally to send those converted leftist students out to brainwash the next generation. We saw the first fruits of it in the campus protests of the 1960s, and by the late 1980s, it was virtually impossible to find a conservative professor on a university faculty. In all of this, issues of truth took a back seat to issues of ideology. In today's woke world, which is largely a product of these leftist educators, the idea that there is even such a thing as objective truth is cast as white European oppression. This ideology is leading us into insanity and cultural collapse. That must affect the way we work, vote, and evangelize. And there's something even more specific that needs to be made clear. For Christian parents, subjecting our children to this indoctrination can no longer be an option. If you look at the Bible to find justification for placing your children under the tutelage of those trained in Marxist institutions, you'll find yourself searching in vain. Because God gives you, mom and dad, the primary responsibility for your children's education. And the primary component of that education is to be trained in godliness. Without that at the center of their education, we are failing our children and we're disobeying God. The responsibility can be delegated to educators who will help you to do this properly, but it cannot be abdicated. You are responsible to God for the education your children receive. I want to thank you for joining us today. Please, at any time, come worship with us right here in Fort Lauderdale at Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church. Or you can join us every Sunday morning via live stream at crpc.tv. Make sure to connect with us on social media at Facebook, Twitter X, Instagram, and make sure to visit the Coral Ridge Ministries page on YouTube and hit subscribe so that you don't miss a thing. And now, here's a look at the next Truths That Transform.
That's all politics is morality. It's not a question of morality, it's a question of what morality and whose morality.
That's next week. This has been a production of Coral Ridge Ministries.